okay? That's not your seat. That's not your seat, sweetheart. The help flies in the back.
The words sliced through the champagne-scented air of first class like a blade through silk. Brittany Vanderberg didn't whisper them. She didn't mutter them under her breath. She delivered them with the crisp confidence of someone who had never been told no, never been questioned, never been challenged by anyone who mattered. She stood there in the aisle of American Airlines Flight 447, a vision of platinum blonde perfection and designer entitlement, looking down at the young black woman seated in 1A. Her manicured finger adorned with a diamond that could fund a small country's education budget pointed toward the back of the plane like she was directing traffic. Economy is that way, honey. I'm sure there's been some kind of mistake. The young woman in seat 1. A didn't move. Maya Rodriguez Jackson sat perfectly still, her dark eyes fixed straight ahead, her hands folded calmly in her lap. She was wearing faded jeans, a gray MIT hoodie that had seen better days, and beat-up Converse sneakers that told stories of 1,000 sidewalks. To anyone looking, she appeared to be exactly what Brittany assumed a nobody who had somehow stumbled into the wrong section. What Brittany couldn't see was the vintage Patek Philippe watch hidden beneath Maya's hoodie sleeve or the weathered leather messenger bag at her feet that contained documents worth more than most people's lifetime earnings. She couldn't see the quiet steel in Maya's eyes, the kind that came from building an empire from nothing, or the careful way Maya was already calculating her next move. Most importantly, Brittany had no idea she was talking to the founder and CEO of Nexus Global, the logistics and AI company that controlled 40% of the world's shipping infrastructure. She had no idea that the woman she was trying to humiliate was worth $12.3 billion, and she certainly had no idea that her husband's failing shipping company depended entirely on Maya's continued partnership to survive. But she was about to find out. The first-class cabin of the Boeing 777 had become an amphitheater of awkward silence. 8 luxury suites, each costing more than most people's monthly rent, suddenly felt cramped as 24 eyes turned toward the confrontation unfolding in 1A. The gentle hum of pre-flight preparations had stopped. Conversations had died mid-sentence. Even the flight attendants had frozen, sensing that something significant was happening. Something that would matter long after the plane landed in London. In seat 2, a Derek Williams, a tech journalist for TechCrunch, slowly reached for his phone. His reporter's instincts were screaming that he was witnessing something important. The casual racism, the obvious class assumptions, the striking contrast between the entitled blonde and the composed young black woman, it had all the makings of a viral moment. "Are you filming this?" whispered his seatmate, a middle-aged woman clutching her pearls. "The whole world needs to see this," Derek replied quietly, opening his live stream app. Within seconds, he was broadcasting to his 50,000 followers. "We're witnessing discrimination in first class on American Airlines Flight 447 from Miami to London. This is happening right now, across the aisle in seat 1K. Sarah Mitchell, a civil rights attorney from Boston, leaned forward. She had been reviewing case files on her laptop, but now her full attention was locked on the scene unfolding before her. In her 15 years of practicing law, she had seen this scenario play out countless times in restaurants, hotels, stores, and now apparently on airplanes. But something about this felt different. The young woman being confronted had an aura of quiet authority that reminded Sarah of federal judges she had argued before. "Excuse me," Maya said, finally her voice soft but clear. It was the first time she had spoken since boarding, and her tone carried a weight that seemed to settle over the cabin like a heavy blanket. "I believe you're mistaken. This is my assigned seat." She reached into her messenger bag and pulled out her boarding pass, holding it up with the same calm precision she used in boardroom negotiations. "Seat 1A, Maya Rodriguez Jackson." Brittany glanced at the boarding pass with the kind of dismissive look she reserved for parking tickets and charity solicitations. "Oh, please. Like I haven't seen fake boarding passes before. Do you really think I'm that naive?" She turned toward the galley where James Martinez, a flight attendant with 8 years of experience and zero tolerance for drama, was preparing the pre-flight service. "James, could you please help this person find her actual seat? She's clearly confused about where she belongs." James Martinez had seen entitled passengers before. In his years working first-class routes, he had dealt with celebrities throwing tantrums, politicians making demands, and billionaires treating him like furniture. But this situation felt different. The composed young woman in 1A had shown him her boarding pass when she first sat down. It was legitimate. Her seat assignment was correct. And now he was being asked to remove her based on nothing more than someone else's assumption about where she belonged. Ma'am James said to Brittany, his voice professional but firm, "I checked Ms. Rodriguez-Jackson's boarding pass when she boarded. Her seat assignment is correct. She is in the right place." Brittany's perfectly contoured face twisted into an expression of disbelief. "Are you serious right now? Look at her. Does she look like someone who can afford a first-class seat to London? This is obviously some kind of diversity program gone wrong, or maybe she won one of those online contests. Either way, she doesn't belong here." The silence in the cabin became deafening. It was the kind of quiet that happens when someone says something so outrageous, so obviously wrong, that everyone needs a moment to process what they just heard. Maya's expression didn't change. She had heard worse, much worse, on her journey from a scholarship kid at MIT to one of the most powerful tech executives in the world. At 12 years old, she had been kicked out of a hotel pool in Atlanta because the manager assumed she was trespassing. At 22, she had been mistaken for the catering staff at her own startup's investor meeting. At 25, she had watched venture capitalists dismiss her revolutionary logistics algorithm because they couldn't believe a young black woman had created it. Each incident had taught her something valuable. Anger was a luxury she couldn't afford, but memory was a tool she could wield with surgical precision. She remembered every slight, every assumption, every moment when someone had tried to make her smaller. And she had built her empire in part on proving them wrong. "I paid for this seat," Maya said quietly. "I have a confirmed reservation. I'm not moving." Brittany's laugh was sharp and cold. "Oh, you're one of those, aren't you? Let me guess you're going to start talking about your rights and discrimination and all that victim mentality nonsense. This isn't about race, sweetie. This is about class. This is about knowing your place." Derek Williams's live stream was exploding. Comments were flooding in from viewers around the world, and his viewer count was climbing rapidly. He was a seasoned tech journalist, but even he was shocked by the brazenness of the discrimination he was witnessing. "For those just joining," he whispered into his phone, "we have a situation on American Airlines Flight 447 where a passenger is trying to force another passenger out of her legitimately assigned first-class seat. The assumptions being made here are frankly appalling." Sarah Mitchell had heard enough. As a civil rights attorney, she knew she was witnessing a textbook case of discrimination, and she couldn't sit silent. She stood up, her presence immediately commanding attention. "Excuse me," Sarah said, her courtroom voice carrying across the cabin. "I'm Sarah Mitchell, and I'm an attorney specializing in civil rights law. What I'm witnessing here is clear discrimination based on racial assumptions. Ms. Rodriguez-Jackson has a valid boarding pass for this seat. There is no legal or airline policy basis for asking her to move." Brittany turned toward Sarah with the kind of look she typically reserved for service workers who dared to make eye contact. "And you are?" "I'm someone who recognizes illegal discrimination when I see it," Sarah replied. "And I'm someone who will gladly serve as a witness if this situation escalates further." From the cockpit area, Captain Lisa Torres had been listening to the commotion with growing concern. In her 20 years of flying commercial aircraft, She had seen her share of passenger disputes, but this situation was different. The voices were getting louder, phones were being raised to record, and she could sense the tension building throughout the first-class cabin. Captain Torres was a no-nonsense professional who had earned her position through skill determination and an absolute commitment to safety. That commitment extended beyond mechanical safety to the safety and dignity of every passenger under her responsibility. She had flown through hurricanes, handled emergency landings, and navigated air traffic control in 6 different languages. But right now she was facing something that felt more dangerous than turbulence unchecked prejudice at 35,000 feet. James Captain Torres called from the cockpit door, "Is there a problem in the cabin?" James Martinez looked up at his captain, then at the scene unfolding in first class. Maya sat calmly in her assigned seat, her boarding pass visible on her tray table. Brittany stood in the aisle, her champagne glass still in hand, her face flushed with indignation. Derek Williams had his phone raised, clearly recording. Sarah Mitchell was standing ready to intervene legally. And scattered throughout the cabin, other passengers were pulling out their own phones, sensing that they were witnessing something significant. Captain Torres James said carefully, "We have a passenger dispute regarding seat assignments. Ms. Rodriguez-Jackson is in her correctly assigned seat 1A. Another passenger is demanding she be moved despite having no valid claim to the seat." Captain Torres stepped fully into the cabin, her uniform and bearing immediately shifting the dynamic. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Captain Torres. I understand there's been some confusion about seating assignments. Let me be very clear. Anyone sitting in this first-class cabin has a valid ticket and assigned seat. There will be no passengers asked to move unless there is a safety or security concern." She looked directly at Brittany. "Ma'am, if you have concerns about your seat assignment, I'd be happy to have our gate agent review your boarding pass. But no passenger will be removed from their assigned seat based on assumptions about their appearance or background." Brittany's face was now bright red. "This is ridiculous. I am Brittany Vanderberg. My husband sits on the boards of 3 major shipping companies. I have flown first class on this route dozens of times. I know who belongs here and who doesn't." The name Vanderberg hit Maya like a physical blow, though she was careful not to show it on her face. Vanderberg Shipping was one of her company's largest clients, accounting for nearly $800 million in annual contracts. Robert Vanderberg, Brittany's husband, had been negotiating desperately with Nexus Global for months, trying to secure additional services to keep his failing company afloat. Maya knew things about Vanderberg Shipping that even Robert's own board didn't know. Through her AI monitoring systems, she had identified patterns of financial irregularities, regulatory violations, and operational shortcuts that painted a picture of a company in deep trouble. The only thing keeping Vanderberg Shipping from complete collapse was their partnership with Nexus Global, and now Robert Vanderberg's wife was trying to humiliate the very person whose business was keeping their family empire alive. Maya's mind raced through the implications. She was flying to London for a crucial meeting with European Union regulators about a $6.8 billion acquisition that would expand Nexus Global's influence across 3 continents. The meeting was scheduled for tomorrow morning, and missing it would cost her company years of preparation and hundreds of millions in development costs. But she was also witnessing something that went beyond business, the casual, confident exercise of racial privilege that she had dedicated her career to dismantling. Every algorithm Nexus Global had developed included bias detection protocols. Every partnership contract included anti-discrimination clauses. Every hiring decision was filtered through equity analysis systems that Maya had personally designed. She had built her company in part to ensure that moments like this would become impossible. And now she was living through one herself at 30,000 feet, with the world watching through Derek Williams's live stream. "Mrs. Vanderberg," Maya said quietly, using Brittany's married name for the first time. "I think you should sit down." Brittany's eyes narrowed. "How do you know my name?" Maya smiled for the first time since the confrontation began. It was a small, knowing smile that carried the weight of information that Brittany couldn't begin to imagine. "I know a lot of things," Maya said. and in about 10 minutes, you're going to wish you had taken my advice. The tension in first class had reached a breaking point, but Maya Rodriguez Jackson's mind was traveling backward to a hotel pool in Atlanta on a sweltering summer day when she was 12 years old. She had been staying with her grandmother, a hotel housekeeper who had managed to save enough money for a weekend getaway at a modest resort. Maya had been excited about the pool, had packed her favorite swimsuit, had dreamed about spending the afternoon swimming laps and practicing the diving techniques she had seen on television. But when she arrived at the pool area, still dripping from the outdoor shower, a manager had approached her with the kind of forced smile that masked something uglier underneath. "Excuse me, young lady, but this pool is for hotel guests only. The community center is about 6 blocks that way." Maya had shown him her grandmother's room. Key had explained that they were staying in room 237, had even offered to call her grandmother to confirm. But the manager had insisted that there must be some mistake, that perhaps she was confused, that maybe she should just run along and find somewhere more appropriate to swim. Her grandmother had arrived 15 minutes later after Maya had sat crying on a poolside chair watching white children splash and play in the water she had been denied. The confrontation that followed had been quiet but devastating. Her grandmother, a woman who had cleaned these hotel rooms for 30 years, who knew every manager and supervisor by name, had spoken with the calm authority of someone who had been disrespected too many times to count. "That child," her grandmother had said, "is my granddaughter. She is a guest at this hotel. She has every right to use this pool. And if you prevent her from doing so, I will make sure that everyone in this city knows that the Marriott downtown discriminates against black children." The manager had apologized, had claimed there had been a misunderstanding, had suddenly become very accommodating. But the damage had been done. Maya had spent the rest of the afternoon in the pool, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, judged, measured against some invisible standard that had nothing to do with her swimming ability or her right to be there. That night, lying in the hotel room bed next to her snoring grandmother, Maya had made a promise to herself. She would never again be in a position where someone could tell her she didn't belong. She would build something so significant, so undeniable, that no manager, no security guard, no platinum blonde in designer clothes would ever again have the power to make her feel small. 15 years later, sitting in seat 1, a while Brittany Vanderberg demanded her removal. Maya realized that her 12-year-old self had been both right and wrong. She had built that undeniable thing, had created a technology empire that had fundamentally changed how goods moved around the world. But the power to make her feel small hadn't disappeared. It had just moved to higher altitudes. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to lower your voice," James Martinez was saying to Brittany, his professional composure beginning to strain. As a flight attendant, he had been trained to de-escalate passenger conflicts. But this situation was unlike anything he had encountered in his 8 years with American Airlines. James had grown up in East Los Angeles, the son of immigrants who had worked multiple jobs to give their children opportunities they had never had. His father had cleaned office buildings at night and worked construction during the day. His mother had taken care of other people's children while raising 3 of her own. They had taught James that dignity was not something that could be purchased or inherited, but something that had to be earned through character and maintained through integrity. Now, watching Brittany Vanderberg wave her champagne glass like a scepter while demanding the removal of a passenger who had done nothing wrong, James felt his professional training warring with his personal values. He had seen entitled passengers before, but this level of casual racism delivered with such confident authority was testing his ability to remain diplomatic. "Lower my voice." Brittany's volume actually increased. "I'm not the one who's out of place here. I'm not the one who needs to be escorted back to economy where I belong. This is exactly what's wrong with this country. People think they can just take what they haven't earned, claim seats they can't afford, and then play the victim when someone calls them out on it. Derek Williams's live stream had exploded beyond anything he had experienced in 5 years of technology journalism. His viewer count had climbed past 200,000 and was still rising. The chat comments were scrolling so fast he could barely read them, but the sentiment was unanimous. Viewers around the world were witnessing something that felt historic in its audacity. "I've covered tech conferences, product launches, and billion-dollar acquisitions," Derek whispered to his phone, "but I've never seen anything quite like this level of privilege and prejudice on display. This woman is literally demanding that a fellow passenger be removed from her assigned seat based on nothing more than her appearance." In the comments, viewers were sharing their own experiences of discrimination, their own moments of being told they didn't belong. The hashtag Flight447 was beginning to trend on Twitter, and clips of Derek's stream were already being shared across TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook. Sarah Mitchell was documenting everything with the precision of someone who had spent years building legal cases around discrimination. As a civil rights attorney, she understood that moments like this were rarely captured so completely with so many witnesses in such a confined space. Usually, discrimination happened in shadows with plausible deniability, with just enough ambiguity to make legal action difficult. But this was different. This was taking place in full view of 24 first-class passengers with multiple camera angles recording every word, every gesture, every assumption. Brittany Vanderberg was creating a legal case study in real time, seemingly oblivious to the fact that her words and actions were being preserved for posterity. "Mrs. Vanderberg," Sarah said, standing to face her directly, "I want to make sure you understand what's happening here. You are demanding the removal of a passenger from her assigned seat based on racial assumptions about her economic status. That is textbook discrimination, and it's being documented by multiple independent sources." Brittany turned on Sarah with the fury of someone who was used to having her authority go unquestioned. "And I want to make sure you understand something, lady lawyer. This isn't a courtroom and you're not my judge. This is real life where some people know their place and others need to be reminded of it." The words hung in the air like toxic smoke. Even passengers in other sections of first class who had been trying to mind their own business were now turning to stare. A businessman in seat 3. A lowered his Wall Street Journal completely. An elderly couple in the back row craned their necks to get a better view. A family with 2 teenage daughters sat in stunned silence, the parents clearly struggling with how to explain what their children were witnessing. Maya had remained perfectly still throughout the escalation, but now she reached into her messenger bag and pulled out her phone. To anyone watching, it might have looked like she was simply checking messages or preparing to call for help. But Maya Rodriguez Jackson wasn't calling for help. She was calling for backup. Emma Fernandez answered on the first ring, despite the fact that it was after midnight in Palo Alto. As Maya's executive assistant and closest confidant, Emma was accustomed to crisis calls at impossible hours. But when she heard the background noise of airplane engines and raised voices, her attention sharpened immediately. "Maya, what's happening? Aren't you supposed to be in the air by now?" "We're still on the ground," Maya said quietly, her voice barely audible above Brittany's continuing tirade. "And we have a situation. I need you to pull everything we have on Vanderberg Shipping. Everything. Financial records, partnership agreements, regulatory compliance reports, executive compensation structures. And Emma, I need it in the next 10 minutes. There was a pause on the other end of the line as Emma processed the request. In 3 years of working as Maya's assistant, she had learned not to question the urgency or timing of such requests. Maya Rodriguez Jackson was not someone who made impulsive decisions or wasted resources on petty vendettas. If she was asking for comprehensive intelligence on Vanderberg Shipping while sitting on a delayed flight, there was a very good reason. "On it," Emma said. "Should I also alert Alex Rivera?" Alex Rivera was Maya's corporate investigator, a former FBI agent who specialized in uncovering the kinds of financial irregularities and compliance violations that could destroy companies overnight. Maya had hired him 2 years ago after discovering that several of Nexus Global's competitors were using offshore shell companies to avoid taxation and regulatory oversight. "Yes," Maya said. "Tell Alex I need a full workup on Robert and Brittany Vanderberg. Personal finances, corporate holdings, regulatory violations, legal vulnerabilities. Everything that isn't protected by attorney-client privilege." "How deep?" Emma asked. Maya glanced up at Brittany, who was now gesturing wildly with her champagne glass while explaining to James Martinez why certain people simply didn't belong in first-class accommodations. "All the way to bedrock," Maya said. "I have a feeling we're going to need every piece of leverage we can find." While Maya was quietly orchestrating her response, Captain Lisa Torres was facing her own professional crisis. In 20 years of commercial aviation, she had dealt with drunk passengers, unruly children, mechanical failures, and weather emergencies. But she had never dealt with a passenger conflict that felt so loaded with legal and social implications. Captain Torres had earned her wings through skill and determination in an industry that had not always welcomed women or Latinos. She had been the first Latina pilot hired by American Airlines in the Southeast region, and she had spent years proving that she belonged in the cockpit through performance that left no room for doubt or discrimination. Now she was watching a passenger try to do to another woman what had been attempted on her countless times throughout her career: the casual assertion that some people simply didn't belong in certain spaces, regardless of their qualifications or rights. James Captain Torres said, approaching the flight attendant with quiet authority, "I need to understand exactly what's happening here. Are we dealing with a seating assignment error, a security concern, or something else entirely?" "James?" Martinez looked at his captain with relief. Throughout the escalating conflict, he had felt caught between his training to provide customer service and his duty to protect all passengers from harassment and discrimination. Captain Miss Rodriguez-Jackson has a valid boarding pass for Seat 1A. I verified it when she boarded. Mrs. Vanderberg is demanding that she be moved, but she has provided no valid reason for the request. Her objections appear to be based solely on assumptions about Ms. Rodriguez-Jackson's appearance and economic status. Captain Torres nodded understanding immediately. This wasn't about airline policy or safety procedures. This was about power privilege and the assumption that certain people had the right to determine where others belonged. "Mrs. Vanderberg." Captain Torres said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had landed planes in thunderstorms and navigated aircraft through international airspace. "I'm going to explain this once clearly, and I expect to be understood. Every passenger in this first-class cabin has purchased a ticket and been assigned a seat. No passenger will be asked to move unless there is a legitimate safety or security concern. Appearance assumptions about economic status or personal preferences are not valid reasons for seat changes." Brittany's face had turned an alarming shade of red. "Are you people serious right now? I am Brittany Vanderberg. My husband's company moves more cargo through American ports than any other private shipping concern. Do you have any idea what kind of influence we have? What kind of problems we can create for this airline?" It was then that Maya Rodriguez-Jackson spoke for the second time since the confrontation had begun, her voice carrying a quiet confidence that seemed to stop all other conversation in the cabin. "Mrs. Vanderberg," Maya said, not looking up from her phone where Emma was already sending preliminary financial reports about Vanderberg shipping, "I think you should be very careful about making threats right now, especially threats based on your husband's business connections." Brittany spun toward Maya, her champagne glass sloshing dangerously. "Excuse me, did you just threaten me? Did this nobody just threaten me?" Maya looked up slowly, her dark eyes meeting Brittany's for the first time since the confrontation had begun. When she spoke, her voice was soft, but it carried the kind of authority that comes from controlling billion-dollar decisions and managing global operations. "No, Mrs. Vanderberg. I gave you advice. There's a difference. But if you'd like to continue making assumptions about who belongs where and who has influence over whom, I'm happy to have that conversation. Something in Maya's tone penetrated even Brittany's self-absorbed fury. For the first time since she had approached Seat 1A, Brittany seemed to sense that she might be missing something important about the situation she had created. Derek Williams caught the shift in dynamics immediately. His reporter's instincts were screaming that the story was about to take a major turn, and he adjusted his phone angle to capture both women's faces clearly. For those joining the stream, Derek whispered, "We may be about to witness something unprecedented here." The passenger being harassed has just responded with the kind of quiet confidence that suggests there's much more to this story than we initially realized. Sarah Mitchell had also noticed the change. As an attorney, she had learned to recognize the moment when the balance of power in a negotiation or confrontation begins to shift. Maya Rodriguez-Jackson's demeanor had transformed subtly but unmistakably. She was no longer simply defending her right to her assigned seat. She was asserting a different kind of authority entirely. Ma'am James Martinez said to Maya, sensing that she might be the key to resolving the conflict. "Is there anything you need assistance with?" Maya smiled at James, and for the first time since boarding, her expression was genuinely warm. "Thank you, James. Actually, there is something you can help me with. Could you please ask the gate agent to delay our departure for about 15 more minutes? I'm expecting some important information that will help resolve this situation." "Delay the departure," Brittany shrieked. "For what? So you can call more of your little friends to come support your victim narrative." "This is insane." Captain Torres stepped forward again, her patience clearly wearing thin. "Mrs. Vanderburg, you need to lower your voice immediately. You are disturbing other passengers, creating a hostile environment, and interfering with crew operations. If you cannot control your behavior, I will have you removed from this aircraft." The threat of removal seemed to penetrate Brittany's rage-induced haze. For the first time since the confrontation had begun, she seemed to realize that her behavior might have consequences that extended beyond getting her way in a seating dispute. "You wouldn't dare," Brittany said, but her voice lacked its previous conviction. "Do you know what kind of lawsuit my family's attorneys would file? Do you understand what kind of media attention this would generate?" Maya's phone buzzed with an incoming message from Emma. As she read the preliminary financial analysis of Vanderburg Shipping, her expression didn't change, but Derek Williams, who was watching her carefully through his phone screen, noticed that she sat up slightly straighter. "Mrs. Vanderburg." Maya said, her voice now carrying an edge that hadn't been there before. "I think you should be much more concerned about the media attention this is already generating. And I think you should sit down, because in about 10 minutes, when my assistant finishes compiling the financial records of your husband's company, this conversation is going to take a very different turn." The silence that followed Maya's words was different from the awkward quiet that had pervaded the first-class cabin earlier. This was the kind of silence that happens when everyone in a room realizes simultaneously that they are witnessing something historically significant. Something that will be talked about and analyzed and referenced for years to come. Derek Williams felt it through his live stream. His viewer count had climbed past 500,000 and was still rising exponentially. The comments section had become a waterfall of reactions from around the world, and he could see that major news outlets were beginning to pick up the story. CNN had just posted a breaking news alert. Discrimination incident unfolds, live on commercial flight. BBC was running a banner, viral video captures first-class confrontation. The hashtag Flight 447 was trending in 17 countries. "Ladies and gentlemen," Derek whispered to his phone, trying to keep his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. "I've been covering technology and business stories for 5 years, but I think we're about to witness something unprecedented. The passenger who has been subjected to discrimination for the past 20 minutes just suggested that she has detailed financial information about her harasser's family business. This is no longer just about a seat assignment. Sarah Mitchell was documenting everything with the precision of someone who understood that they were watching legal history unfold. As a civil rights attorney, she had built her career on cases that started exactly like this, moments when prejudice and privilege collided with consequences in ways that created precedent for future generations. She had pulled out her own phone and was recording from a different angle, ensuring that the legal record would be comprehensive and unassailable. But more than that, she was beginning to recognize something in Maya Rodriguez Jackson's demeanor that reminded her of the most powerful executives she had represented over the years. There was an authority there that went far beyond someone simply defending their right to an airplane seat. Mrs. Vanderburg. Sarah said, her courtroom voice cutting through the tension. I want to make sure you understand what's being documented here. Multiple independent witnesses are recording your actions and statements. Your demand that this passenger be removed based on racial assumptions about her economic status constitutes clear discrimination. Your threats against airline personnel constitute harassment. And your repeated insistence that certain people don't belong in first-class accommodations based on their appearance constitutes a civil rights violation that could result in federal charges. Brittany Vanderburg had built her adult life on the assumption that her husband's wealth and connections made her essentially untouchable. She had never worked a day in her professional life, had never faced consequences for her actions, had never been told no by anyone who mattered. The idea that her behavior on an airplane could result in legal consequences was so foreign to her worldview that she initially dismissed it entirely. Federal charges. Brittany laughed a sharp, cold sound that carried no genuine amusement. For what? For expecting people to know their place, for maintaining standards, for refusing to pretend that everyone belongs everywhere. This is America, lady lawyer. I have the right to express my opinions. Maya looked up from her phone where Emma was sending increasingly detailed financial reports about Vanderburg shipping. The picture they painted was even worse than she had suspected. The company was not just struggling, it was hanging on by a thread so thin that a strong breeze could snap it completely. You have the right to express your opinions, Mrs. Vanderburg, Maya said quietly. But you don't have the right to demand that paying customers be removed from their assigned seats based on those opinions. And you definitely don't have the right to do so without consequences. Consequences? Brittany's voice was rising again. From who? From you. What are you going to do? File a complaint with the airline. Write a bad review online. Post an angry video on social media. I've got news for you, sweetheart. My family has more lawyers than you have followers. It was at that moment that James Martinez received a message on his crew communication device that would change the trajectory of everything that followed. The gate agent had forwarded a priority communication from American Airlines corporate headquarters. Someone in the company's crisis management team had been monitoring Derek Williams's live stream, had seen the discrimination unfolding in real time, and had made a decision that would reverberate throughout the airline industry. Captain Torres James said, approaching his pilot with the device in hand, "We have a priority message from corporate. They're requesting that we document this incident fully, and that we take whatever steps are necessary to ensure the safety and dignity of all passengers." Captain Torres read the message quickly, and her expression became even more serious. American Airlines was making it clear that they would not tolerate discrimination on their aircraft, and that they would support their crew in taking whatever action was necessary to address the situation. Mrs. Vanderburg, Captain Torres, said, her voice now carrying the full authority of both her position and her company's backing, you are being disruptive to other passengers and crew. You are making demands that have no basis in airline policy or federal law, and you are creating a hostile environment based on racial discrimination. I am ordering you to return to your assigned seat immediately and to cease harassing other passengers. Brittany's face had progressed from red to purple. You're ordering me. You're ordering me. Do you know who I am? Do you know what kind of connections my family has in this industry? That was when Maya Rodriguez Jackson decided that the time for subtlety had passed. She had spent 20 minutes listening to racial slurs and class-based assumptions while maintaining the kind of dignified restraint that had been drummed into her by decades of navigating predominantly white spaces. She had given Brittany multiple opportunities to back down, multiple chances to recognize that she was making a catastrophic mistake. But Brittany had doubled down on every insult, had escalated every confrontation, and had made it clear that she believed her privilege made her untouchable. Now it was time for Maya to demonstrate exactly how wrong that assumption was. "Actually, Mrs. Vanderburg," Maya said, standing up for the first time since the confrontation had begun. "Let's talk about connections. Let's talk about who knows whom in this industry. Let's talk about influence and power and who really controls what." Maya's voice had changed completely. Gone was the quiet defensiveness of someone trying to avoid confrontation. In its place was the commanding presence of someone who was accustomed to running boardrooms, negotiating billion-dollar deals, and making decisions that affected thousands of employees and millions of customers around the world. James, Maya said, turning to the flight attendant with a smile that was both warm and predatory. "Could you please ask the gate agent to patch me through to American Airlines, CEO Robert Isom. Tell him Maya Rodriguez Jackson needs to speak with him about a partnership opportunity." The name hit the cabin like a physical blow. Several passengers gasped audibly. Derek Williams nearly dropped his phone. Sarah Mitchell's eyes widened in recognition. Even Captain Torres, who prided herself on maintaining professional composure under pressure, couldn't hide her surprise. Maya Rodriguez Jackson wasn't just any tech executive. She was one of the most powerful and influential business leaders in the world, a woman whose company controlled the logistics networks that kept global commerce flowing. Her partnerships with airlines, shipping companies, and transportation providers were worth hundreds of billions of dollars collectively, and she had just been subjected to 20 minutes of racial discrimination while sitting in her assigned seat on American Airlines Flight 447. Brittany Vanderburg, however, was still operating under the assumption that Maya was bluffing. Her worldview couldn't accommodate the possibility that the young black woman she had been trying to humiliate was actually more powerful and influential than she was. Maya Rodriguez Jackson. Brittany laughed. "Really, that's the best you can do? You're going to pretend to be some famous businesswoman? Do you think we're all idiots? Do you think I don't know what Maya Rodriguez Jackson looks like?" Derek Williams lowered his phone slightly, staring at Maya with the kind of recognition that comes from having covered the tech industry for years. He had interviewed Maya Rodriguez Jackson twice, had written profiles of her company, had followed her rise from MIT graduate to Forbes cover story. The woman sitting in seat 1A was absolutely unquestionably the real Maya Rodriguez Jackson. "Oh my God," Derek whispered to his live stream, his voice barely audible, but picked up clearly by his phone's microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, I can confirm that the passenger being discriminated against is actually Maya Rodriguez Jackson, the founder and CEO of Nexus Global. She is one of the most powerful tech executives in the world, worth over $12 billion, and she has been sitting here for 20 minutes listening to racial slurs and class-based harassment." The live stream comments exploded. Viewers who had been following the story as a general discrimination incident suddenly realized they were watching something much more significant, the real-time humiliation of one of the world's most successful entrepreneurs by someone who had no idea who she was talking to. Sarah Mitchell stood up abruptly, her legal mind immediately grasping the implications of what she had just learned. "Mrs. Vanderburg, I strongly advise you to sit down and stop talking immediately. You have just spent 20 minutes racially harassing one of the most powerful business executives in the world, and every word of it has been recorded by multiple independent sources." But Brittany was too far down the path of her own making to turn back now. Her entire identity was built on the assumption that her husband's wealth and connections made her superior to everyone else in most situations. The idea that she could be wrong, that she could be the one who didn't belong, was so fundamentally threatening to her sense of self that she couldn't accept it. "I don't care if she claims to be the Queen of England," Brittany snarled. Look at her. Look at how she's dressed. Look at where she comes from. People like that don't just become billionaires. They don't just build companies. They win lotteries or marry rich men or get lucky with some diversity program. Real success, real wealth, real power, it comes from families like mine. It comes from people who understand class and breeding and what it means to truly belong in places like this. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the aircraft's engines seemed to quiet in the face of such breathtaking ignorance and prejudice. Maya Rodriguez-Jackson had heard racist assumptions before, but rarely delivered with such confident authority, and never in front of such a comprehensive audience. Maya reached into her messenger bag and pulled out her tablet, a custom device that provided secure access to Nexus Global's corporate systems. With a few touches, she brought up her company's partnership database filtered specifically for Vanderburg shipping. Mrs. Vanderburg. Maya said, her voice now carrying the cold precision she used in hostile takeover negotiations. Let me tell you about real power. Let me tell you about real influence. Let me tell you about who actually controls the industry your husband works in. She turned the tablet toward Brittany, displaying a comprehensive financial analysis of Vanderburg shipping. The numbers told a story of a company in freefall, sustained only by increasingly desperate measures and the goodwill of partners who were beginning to lose patience. Your husband's company is 6 months away from complete collapse, Maya said, her voice audible throughout the first-class cabin. They have $2.3 billion in undisclosed liabilities. They have been cited for safety violations in 12 different jurisdictions. They have been borrowing against future contracts to meet current payroll obligations. The only thing keeping Vanderburg shipping operational is their partnership with Nexus Global, which accounts for 60% of their annual revenue. Brittany stared at the tablet screen, her champagne glass trembling in her hand. The numbers were incomprehensible to her, but the implications were beginning to penetrate even her privileged bubble, and Mrs. Vanderburg Maya continued scrolling through additional reports that Emma had compiled. I am the founder and CEO of Nexus Global, which means that for the past 20 minutes, while you've been telling me that I don't belong in first class, that people like me don't build real companies, that I should know my place. You have been racially harassing the one person whose business decisions determine whether your family remains wealthy or becomes bankrupt. The tablet screen now displayed partnership termination protocols, legal frameworks for contract cancellation, and regulatory compliance requirements that Vanderburg Shipping was currently violating. Maya scrolled through them with the casual efficiency of someone who dealt with such documents daily. Every shipping route your husband controls, I can shut down with a single phone call, Maya said. Every logistics contract that keeps your company operational, I can cancel with a single email. Every regulatory agency that has been giving Vanderburg Shipping the benefit of the doubt, I can provide with comprehensive evidence of violations that would result in immediate operational suspension. Brittany's champagne glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the cabin floor. The sound seemed to echo through the silence that had enveloped first class. Other passengers were staring in stunned disbelief, trying to process what they were witnessing. Derek Williams was narrating the scene for his live stream audience in hushed, amazed tones. Ladies and gentlemen, we are watching the complete reversal of a power dynamic in real time. The woman who spent 20 minutes trying to remove a passenger from first class has just discovered that she was harassing someone who has the power to destroy her family's entire business empire. James Martinez was standing nearby holding a towel to clean up the broken glass, but his attention was completely focused on the confrontation unfolding before him. In 8 years of flight service, he had never seen anything remotely comparable to what was happening in his cabin. Captain Torres had returned to the cockpit area, but she was monitoring the situation closely through the intercom system. She had made the decision to keep the aircraft grounded until the passenger conflict was fully resolved, and she was beginning to understand that the resolution might have implications far beyond a simple seating dispute. Maya's phone buzzed with another message from Emma, this one containing information that Alex Rivera had compiled about the Vanderburg family's personal finances. The picture it painted was even more damning than the corporate analysis. Mrs. Vanderburg, Maya said, glancing at the new information. Would you like to discuss your personal financial situation as well? Because according to my research, your lifestyle is entirely dependent on income from a company that is technically insolvent. Your Manhattan apartment is mortgaged beyond its value. Your Hamptons house has 3 liens against it. Your husband has been liquidating retirement accounts to cover personal expenses for the past 18 months. Maya looked up from her phone, meeting Brittany's eyes directly. So, when you talk about knowing your place, when you talk about understanding class and breeding, when you talk about who belongs where, you might want to consider that your entire existence is currently being subsidized by the woman you just spent 20 minutes trying to humiliate. Sarah Mitchell was documenting everything with the focused intensity of someone who understood that she was witnessing a moment that would be studied in business schools and civil rights courses for decades. The complete reversal of assumptions, the methodical dismantling of privilege through factual information, the demonstration that quiet competence could be more powerful than loud entitlement. It was unlike anything she had seen in 15 years of legal practice. But even Sarah was unprepared for what Maya Rodriguez-Jackson said next. Mrs. Vanderburg. Maya said, her voice now carrying the kind of finality that comes with making irreversible decisions. I want you to understand something very clearly. I didn't board this flight looking for a confrontation. I didn't sit in seat 1A hoping to be discriminated against. I dressed simply because I prefer comfort to display. I flew commercial instead of taking my private jet because I believe in experiencing the same transportation systems that my company helps to operate. Maya stood up fully now, and her presence seemed to fill the entire first-class cabin. But you looked at me and decided that my appearance gave you the right to determine where I belonged. You assumed that my race and my clothing meant that I couldn't possibly afford to sit in first class. You spent 20 minutes making those assumptions clear to everyone within earshot, despite being corrected by flight crew, despite being challenged by other passengers, despite being given multiple opportunities to recognize your mistake. Maya's tablet chimed with an incoming video call. The screen showed Robert Isom, the CEO of American Airlines, calling from his corporate headquarters. Maya looked at Brittany one last time before answering the call. Mrs. Vanderburg. Maya said, I want you to listen very carefully to this conversation, because you're about to learn what actual influence sounds like. Maya answered the video call, and Robert Isom's face appeared on the tablet screen, clearly visible to everyone in the first-class cabin. His expression was grave, and his voice carried the weight of someone who understood that his company was facing a potential crisis of unprecedented proportions. Ms. Rodriguez-Jackson Isom said, I want to personally apologize for what has happened on Flight 447. I've been monitoring the situation through our crew communications and through social media coverage, and I want you to know that this kind of discrimination is absolutely unacceptable on American Airlines aircraft. Maya nodded, her expression remaining neutral. Mr. Isom, I appreciate your call, but I think you should understand that this isn't just about one passenger's behavior. This is about patterns of assumptions that allow discrimination to flourish in environments where it should be impossible. The conversation was being broadcast live through Derek Williams's stream, and the implications were beginning to reverberate throughout the airline industry. American Airlines' stock price had already dropped 3 points in after-hours trading, and crisis management teams at competing airlines were holding emergency meetings to review their own anti-discrimination protocols. Ms. Rodriguez-Jackson Isom continued, Whatever you need to make this situation right, American Airlines is prepared to provide. We value our partnership with Nexus Global, but more importantly, we are committed to ensuring that every passenger is treated with dignity and respect. Brittany Vanderberg was still standing in the aisle, but her posture had changed completely. The confident authority that had defined her throughout the confrontation had evaporated, replaced by something that looked very much like panic as she began to understand the scope of the mistake she had made. Maya looked at Brittany one final time before responding to the airline CEO. Mr. Isom, I think the most important thing right now is ensuring that this situation becomes a learning opportunity rather than just a public relations crisis. But we can discuss specific remediation measures after I arrive in London. She ended the call and turned back to Brittany, her voice now carrying the quiet authority of someone who had just demonstrated exactly how power actually worked in the modern world. Mrs. Vanderberg, Maya said you wanted to talk about knowing your place. You wanted to discuss class and breeding and who belongs where. So, let me explain something to you about place and belonging and power. Maya gestured toward the broken champagne glass at Brittany's feet, toward the shocked faces of the other first-class passengers, toward Derek Williams's phone, which was still streaming to more than 1 million viewers worldwide. Your place right now is that of someone who has just committed career suicide on live television while harassing one of the most powerful executives in the logistics industry. Your husband's company will be bankrupt within 6 months unless he can convince me to maintain our partnership despite your behavior. And your social status, your lifestyle, your entire identity as someone who belongs in spaces like this. All of that is dependent on the continued goodwill of the woman you just spent 20 minutes trying to humiliate. The first-class cabin had become completely silent except for the sound of Derek Williams whispering commentary to his live-stream audience. Even the flight attendants had stopped their preparations to listen to what was unfolding. Maya sat back down in seat 1A, her expression calm and composed, despite having just delivered what amounted to a complete destruction of everything Brittany Vanderberg thought she understood about power and privilege. Now, Mrs. Vanderberg, Maya said, her voice carrying the same quiet authority she had maintained throughout the entire confrontation, I think you should sit down. We have a flight to catch, and I have business to attend to in London, and you, I suspect, have some very difficult phone calls to make to your husband. Maya Rodriguez Jackson had spent her entire adult life learning how to wield power responsibly. She had built Nexus Global from a college dorm room algorithm into a $12 billion logistics empire, but more importantly, she had done so while maintaining ethical standards that she believed were essential for long-term success in the modern economy. She had faced discrimination, prejudice, and exclusion throughout her journey, but she had never used her eventual success as a weapon for personal revenge. Instead, she had consistently channeled her influence toward creating systems that would prevent other people from experiencing the barriers she had overcome. But what she had witnessed on Flight 447 wasn't just personal discrimination. It was the expression of beliefs and practices that threatened the foundation of everything she had built. The casual racism Brittany Vanderberg had displayed, the methodical discrimination Vanderberg Shipping had implemented, the confident assertion that certain people didn't deserve opportunities they hadn't inherited. All of that represented a philosophy that Maya had dedicated her career to dismantling. And now she had the power to do something about it immediately, comprehensively, and irreversibly. Mrs. Vanderberg. Maya said, her voice carrying the weight of decisions that would affect thousands of people across multiple industries, effective immediately. Nexus Global is terminating all partnership contracts with Vanderberg Shipping. That includes logistics support, route optimization, cargo tracking, regulatory compliance assistance, and technology licensing agreements. Maya's tablet chimed as Emma Fernandez executed the termination protocols from Nexus Global headquarters. Within seconds, Vanderberg Shipping's access to essential operational systems would be revoked. Their shipping routes would become unsupported, and their ability to track cargo across international boundaries would disappear. Those contracts represent approximately $800 million in annual revenue for your husband's company, Maya continued. Without them, Vanderburg Shipping will be unable to meet its current financial obligations within 30 days. Derek Williams was narrating the destruction of a business empire in real time for his live stream audience, which had now grown to over 2 million viewers worldwide. Major news networks were broadcasting his feed live, and financial markets were beginning to react to the implications of what they were witnessing. "Ladies and gentlemen," Derek whispered, his voice filled with amazement, "we are watching the methodical dismantling of a multi-billion-dollar shipping company by an executive who was racially harassed for 20 minutes. This is unprecedented in the history of business crisis management." But Maya wasn't finished. The evidence Alex Rivera had compiled revealed violations that went far beyond simple contract disputes. Vanderburg Shipping had been engaged in practices that violated federal law, and Maya had both the evidence and the relationships necessary to ensure that those violations would be investigated immediately. Additionally, Maya said, accessing her contact list, "I am forwarding comprehensive evidence of Vanderburg Shipping's discrimination against employees to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the Department of Labor, and the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice." Maya's fingers moved efficiently across her tablet screen as she transmitted detailed reports to federal agencies that had the authority to launch immediate investigations into corporate discrimination practices. The evidence includes employment records showing discriminatory hiring practices, internal communications discussing strategies for excluding qualified candidates based on race, and financial records showing the use of company funds to support organizations with exclusionary membership policies. Sarah Mitchell was documenting everything with the focused intensity of someone who understood that she was witnessing the creation of legal precedents that would be studied for decades. The methodical nature of Maya's response, the comprehensive evidence she had compiled, the immediate implementation of consequences, all of it represented a new model for how discrimination could be addressed in real time. "This is extraordinary," Sarah murmured, taking notes on her phone while continuing to record the proceedings. "We are witnessing the immediate implementation of consequences for discriminatory behavior backed by comprehensive evidence and delivered through legitimate business and legal channels. This is how accountability actually works in the modern economy." Captain Torres had been monitoring the situation from the cockpit, coordinating with American Airlines corporate headquarters about how to manage what had clearly become an international news story. The company's crisis management team had been in emergency session for the past 30 minutes, trying to balance their responsibility to passenger safety with their commitment to addressing discrimination on their aircraft. "Mrs. Rodriguez-Jackson," Captain Torres said, approaching Maya with the respect accorded to someone who had just demonstrated extraordinary grace under pressure. "American Airlines leadership wants to ensure that we handle this situation in a way that supports both accountability and appropriate resolution. What do you need from us to move forward?" Maya looked at Captain Torres with genuine appreciation. Throughout the entire confrontation, the airline crew had maintained professionalism while refusing to enable discrimination. They had followed proper procedures, supported the harassed passenger, and documented everything according to company policy. "Captain Torres, your crew has handled this situation exactly right. James Martinez in particular showed the kind of integrity and professionalism that every airline should expect from its employees. I don't need anything from American Airlines except continued commitment to ensuring that discrimination doesn't happen on your aircraft." Maya turned back to Brittany, who was now sitting in her assigned seat with the stunned expression of someone who was beginning to understand the scope of the consequences she had created. "But Mrs. Vanderburg," Maya continued, "your situation is far from resolved. The termination of business contracts and federal investigations are just the beginning of what you and your husband will be dealing with over the next several months." Maya's phone buzzed with an incoming call from Robert Vanderburg himself. The news of the contract terminations had apparently reached him, and he was calling in a panic to try to understand what had happened to his company's most important business relationship. Maya answered the call on speaker, ensuring that everyone in first class could hear both sides of the conversation that was about to unfold. "Maya, what the hell is going on?" Robert Vanderberg's voice was strained with panic. "I just got alerts that all of our Nexus Global contracts have been terminated. Our systems are shutting down. Our routes are being canceled. Our cargo is being stranded at ports around the world." "What happened?" Maya looked directly at Brittany while responding to her husband. "Robert, your wife spent the past 30 minutes racially harassing me on American Airlines Flight 447. She demanded that I be removed from my assigned first-class seat based on assumptions about my race and economic status. She made it clear that she believes certain people don't belong in spaces she considers exclusive." The silence on the other end of the phone was deafening. Robert Vanderberg was clearly processing the implications of what his wife had done and the realization that his business empire was collapsing because of her behavior. "But that's not the worst part," Robert Maya continued. "The investigation we conducted while your wife was harassing me revealed that Vanderberg Shipping has been methodically implementing the same discriminatory practices at a corporate level. You've been excluding qualified employees based on race using company funds to support exclusionary organizations and violating federal employment law as a matter of routine policy." Maya scrolled through the evidence on her tablet while continuing the conversation. "So, the contract terminations aren't just about your wife's behavior on this airplane. They're about a pattern of discrimination that makes Nexus Global legally and ethically unable to continue our business relationship." Robert's voice, when he finally spoke, was barely above a whisper. "Maya, please. We can fix this. We can address whatever problems you've identified. We can implement new policies, new training, new oversight. Please don't destroy everything we've built over a misunderstanding." A misunderstanding. Maya's voice carried a note of incredulity. "Robert, your wife told me that people like me don't build real companies, that we don't earn our success, that we should know our place. She did so while being supported by income from the very company she was dismissing. That's not a misunderstanding. That's the expression of fundamental beliefs about racial superiority that your company has been implementing as corporate policy." Maya glanced around the first-class cabin, making eye contact with the passengers who had witnessed the entire confrontation. "And Robert, it wasn't just your wife. The evidence shows that you encouraged her behavior, praised her for maintaining what you called appropriate social standards, and used company resources to support discriminatory practices that violated federal law. The implications were devastating. Robert Vanderberg wasn't just losing the business relationships that kept his company operational. He was facing potential criminal charges for ongoing violation of employment law, environmental regulations, and financial reporting requirements." Robert Maya said, her voice now carrying the finality of someone who had made an irreversible decision. "Vanderberg Shipping is finished. Your contracts have been terminated. Federal agencies have been notified of your violations. Your access to essential shipping infrastructure has been revoked. Your company will be bankrupt within 60 days. The phone call ended with the sound of Robert Vanderberg's stunned silence, and Maya turned her attention back to Brittany, who was now visibly shaking as she realized that her 20 minutes of racial harassment had destroyed her family's entire business empire. But Maya wasn't finished. The methodical nature of the discrimination she had uncovered, the deliberate implementation of exclusionary practices, the confident assertion that certain people didn't deserve opportunities they hadn't inherited, all of that represented something that required consequences beyond simple business termination. Mrs. Vanderberg, Maya said, accessing another set of contacts on her tablet. "I'm also forwarding evidence of your discriminatory practices to the Internal Revenue Service, using company funds to support exclusionary organizations while claiming them as legitimate business expenses constitutes tax fraud." Maya's fingers moved across her tablet screen as she transmitted financial records to federal tax authorities who had the power to launch immediate audits and investigations. Additionally, I'm providing evidence to the Securities and Exchange Commission showing that your husband has been filing false financial reports while using company funds for personal expenses. That constitutes securities fraud and could result in criminal prosecution. The methodical destruction of the Vanderburg business empire was happening in real time, broadcast to millions of viewers worldwide, documented by multiple independent sources, and implemented through legitimate legal and regulatory channels. James Martinez was still standing nearby, holding cleaning supplies but completely focused on witnessing what he recognized as a historic moment. In 8 years of flight service, he had seen passenger conflicts, unruly behavior, and occasional discrimination. But he had never seen consequences delivered so immediately, so comprehensively, and so effectively. Ma'am James said to Maya, "Is there anything you need from the crew water coffee? Anything to make you more comfortable after what you've been through?" Maya smiled at James with genuine warmth. "Thank you, James. You've been professional and supportive throughout this entire situation. But I don't need anything except for us to get to London so I can attend my meeting with the European Union regulators." Maya looked back at Brittany one final time. "Mrs. Vanderburg, I want you to understand something about power and consequences. You spent 20 minutes asserting that certain people don't belong in spaces like first class, that we haven't earned our success, that we should know our place. You did so while your entire lifestyle was dependent on the success of the woman you were trying to humiliate." Maya's voice carried the weight of someone who had just demonstrated exactly how power actually worked in the modern economy. But, more importantly, you did so while implementing methodical discrimination that affected thousands of people who didn't have the resources to fight back the way I can. Your husband's company excluded qualified employees, denied opportunities to deserving candidates, and created a work environment where people of color were made to feel exactly the way you tried to make me feel for the past 30 minutes. Maya stood up, gathering her messenger bag and preparing for what she hoped would finally be departure to London. "So the consequences you're experiencing aren't just about what you did to me personally. They're about accountability for methodical practices that have harmed countless people who didn't have the power to respond." Maya looked around the first-class cabin one final time, making eye contact with Derek Williams, whose live stream had documented everything, and Sarah Mitchell, whose legal expertise had provided framework for understanding the significance of what had occurred. "Ladies and gentlemen," Maya said, addressing everyone who had witnessed the confrontation, "I hope you'll remember what you've seen here. Discrimination isn't just about individual prejudice or personal discomfort. It's about methodical practices that deny opportunities, exclude qualified people, and maintain inequality through assumption and exclusion." Maya sat back down in seat 1A, her expression calm and composed, despite having just methodically dismantled a business empire and exposed corporate corruption on live television. Now Maya said to Captain Torres, "I believe we have a flight to London, and I have business to conduct that will help ensure that methodical discrimination becomes much more difficult to implement and much more expensive to maintain." 6 months after flight. 447, the world looked fundamentally different for everyone who had been in first class that day. The viral video of Maya Rodriguez Jackson's quiet dismantling of Brittany Vanderburg's assumptions had been viewed over 300 million times across all platforms. It had been translated into 47 languages, analyzed in business schools on 6 continents, and referenced in congressional hearings about discrimination in transportation. But the real impact wasn't in the social media metrics or the academic analysis. The real impact was in the structural changes that Maya had implemented using the platform her unwanted viral fame had created. 2 weeks after landing in London, Maya had announced the establishment of the Rodriguez Jackson Institute for Transportation Equity, a foundation dedicated to eliminating bias in all forms of commercial transportation. The Institute wasn't just another non-profit organization issuing statements about social justice. It was an operational entity with a $50 million annual budget and the technical capabilities to monitor, document, and address discrimination across airlines, shipping companies, ride-share services, and public transit systems. The Institute's first initiative had been the development of the Nexus Standards Program, a comprehensive framework that companies could adopt to ensure equitable treatment of customers and employees regardless of race, gender, age, or economic status. The standards weren't voluntary guidelines or aspirational goals. They were contractual requirements that came with Maya's business partnerships, which meant that any company wanting to work with Nexus Global had to demonstrate measurable progress toward eliminating discriminatory practices. Within 3 months, over 400 transportation companies had adopted the Nexus standards. Airlines were implementing new crew training programs focused on recognizing and addressing bias. Shipping companies were revising hiring practices to eliminate exclusionary patterns. Rideshare services were developing algorithms to detect and prevent discriminatory treatment of passengers. The changes weren't just policy adjustments or public relations gestures. They were fundamental shifts in how transportation companies operated, backed by the kind of financial leverage that made compliance essential rather than optional. Emma Fernandez had been promoted to Director of Global Equity Initiatives, overseeing the implementation of the new standards across Nexus Global's worldwide network of partnerships. Her office in Palo Alto had become the coordination center for what was essentially a worldwide campaign to eliminate discrimination in transportation, one contract at a time. The beauty of Maya's approach, Emma explained to a reporter from the Harvard Business Review, is that it doesn't rely on changing people's hearts and minds through moral persuasion. It changes behavior through economic incentives and contractual obligations. Companies implement equitable practices because failing to do so costs them access to essential business relationships. The Nexus Standards program included real-time monitoring systems that could detect patterns of discriminatory treatment across transportation networks. If an airline consistently provided inferior service to passengers of color, if a shipping company methodically excluded qualified minority candidates from promotion opportunities, if a ride-share service allowed drivers to discriminate against certain passengers. The monitoring systems would identify those patterns and trigger automatic contract reviews. Maya had learned from her experience on Flight 447 that discrimination often operated through assumptions and biases that people didn't even recognize in themselves. The solution wasn't just to prohibit discriminatory behavior, but to create systems that made such behavior visible, measurable, and costly to maintain. Alex Rivera had been appointed as the Institute's Director of Investigation and Accountability, leading a team of former federal agents and regulatory experts who specialized in uncovering the kinds of methodical discriminatory practices that had been exposed at Vanderburg Shipping. "We don't wait for complaints or reports," Alex explained to a congressional committee studying discrimination in commerce. "We proactively monitor employment patterns, service delivery metrics, and corporate decision-making processes to identify discrimination before it becomes entrenched. Prevention is more effective than punishment." The Institute's investigative capabilities had already led to federal actions against 17 companies across multiple industries. Each investigation followed the same pattern Maya had established with Vanderburg Shipping: comprehensive documentation, immediate consequences, and structural changes designed to prevent future violations. But Maya's most significant innovation was the development of what she called accountability technology, artificial intelligence systems that could monitor bias in real time and provide immediate feedback to prevent discriminatory actions before they occurred. Airlines that adopted the technology saw crew members receive instant alerts if their interactions with passengers showed patterns associated with racial bias. Shipping companies used similar systems to ensure that hiring and promotion decisions were based on qualifications rather than demographics. Rideshare services implemented algorithms that detected and prevented discriminatory behavior by drivers. The technology wasn't designed to replace human judgment, but to augment it by providing objective data about patterns that individuals might not recognize in their own behavior. The goal isn't to create a surveillance state, Maya explained during a keynote speech at the Transportation Equity Conference in Geneva. The goal is to create awareness. Most discrimination happens through unconscious bias rather than deliberate malice. When people understand how their behavior affects others, most of them choose to change. The international response to Maya's initiatives had been even more significant than the domestic impact. The European Union had adopted modified versions of the Nexus standards as part of their transportation regulations. The United Nations had established a working group on transportation equity that used Maya's framework as a foundation for international cooperation. Most importantly, the changes were producing measurable results. Discrimination complaints across transportation industries had decreased by 67%. Employment diversity in transportation companies had increased by 43%. Customer satisfaction scores had improved across all demographic groups. The success of the initiative had also created opportunities for other leaders to implement similar approaches in their own industries. Tech executives were developing equity standards for hiring and promotion. Financial services companies were adopting bias detection systems for lending and investment decisions. Healthcare organizations were implementing monitoring systems to ensure equitable treatment for all patients. James Martinez had been promoted to American Airlines Director of Inclusive Service Excellence, a newly created position that gave him responsibility for implementing equity training across the company's worldwide operations. His experience managing the Flight 447 incident had demonstrated exactly the kind of leadership American Airlines needed to prevent similar situations in the future. The most important thing I learned that day, James told a group of flight attendants during a training session, is that dignity isn't something we can give to passengers as a courtesy. It's something every passenger deserves as a right, and it's our job to ensure that right is protected regardless of how passengers look or how they're dressed or what assumptions we might make about their background. American Airlines had become the first major carrier to adopt the complete Nexus Standards program, implementing bias detection technology, equity training for all employees, and accountability systems that tracked service quality across demographic groups. The company's customer satisfaction scores had improved dramatically, and they had been recognized by multiple civil rights organizations for their leadership in transportation equity. Captain Lisa Torres had been appointed to the Federal Aviation Administration's newly created Office of Transportation Equity, where she helped develop industry-wide standards for preventing discrimination in commercial aviation. Her experience on Flight 447 had demonstrated the importance of crew leadership in addressing bias, and her recommendations had become standard practice across the airline industry. What we learned from Flight 447. Captain Torres explained to a conference of aviation professionals is that discrimination isn't just a social issue or a legal issue. It's a safety issue. When passengers feel unwelcome or unsafe because of their race or appearance, it affects the entire cabin environment and can compromise the safety and comfort of everyone on board. Derek Williams had won 3 journalism awards for his coverage of the Flight 447 incident, but more importantly, his reporting had helped establish new standards for documenting and addressing discrimination in real time. His live stream had demonstrated how social media could be used not just to expose injustice, but to create immediate accountability for discriminatory behavior. The key wasn't just recording what happened, Derek explained during a panel discussion at the Columbia Journalism School. The key was providing context explanation and follow-up that helped viewers understand not just what they were seeing, but why it mattered and what it meant for broader patterns of discrimination in our society. Sarah Mitchell had joined Maya's legal team as general counsel for the Rodriguez-Jackson Institute, where she helped develop the legal frameworks that made comprehensive equity initiatives possible while protecting them from legal challenges. Her expertise in civil rights law had been essential in creating accountability systems that could withstand constitutional scrutiny while effectively addressing discriminatory practices. The traditional approach to civil rights enforcement has been reactive, Sarah explained to a gathering of civil rights attorneys. Someone experiences discrimination, files a complaint, and maybe years later there's some kind of resolution. Maya's approach is proactive. We identify discriminatory patterns before they harm large numbers of people, and we address them through economic incentives that create immediate change. The legal precedents established through the Flight 447 case had also influenced broader civil rights enforcement. Federal agencies were adopting proactive monitoring approaches similar to Maya's methodology. Courts were recognizing the validity of comprehensive approaches to addressing discrimination. Legislation was being introduced that would require large corporations to implement bias detection and accountability systems. But perhaps the most significant long-term impact was cultural. The phrase Flight 447 moment had entered common usage to describe situations where assumptions about race, class, and belonging were challenged by reality. Business schools taught case studies about the incident in courses on crisis management leadership and corporate responsibility. High schools included the story in civics classes about discrimination and accountability. Most importantly, the incident had changed how millions of people thought about the assumptions they made about others based on appearance, race, or economic status. Survey data showed that people who had watched Derek Williams's live stream were significantly more likely to challenge discriminatory behavior when they witnessed it, and significantly less likely to make assumptions about others based on appearance. The Vanderburg family had experienced consequences that extended far beyond financial ruin. Robert Vanderburg had been sentenced to 18 months in federal prison for securities fraud and tax evasion. Brittany had been required to complete 500 hours of community service at organizations serving communities of color, followed by 2 years of supervised probation. But more significantly, both had been required to participate in a restorative justice process that brought them face to face with people who had been harmed by Vanderburg Shipping's discriminatory employment practices. The conversations hadn't been easy, but they had been transformative in ways that traditional punishment couldn't achieve. I spent my entire adult life believing that my family's wealth made me superior to other people, Brittany said during a recorded conversation with Maya as part of the restorative justice process. I never understood that our wealth was built on methodical exclusion of people who were more qualified and more deserving than I ever was. The conversation had been difficult for both women, but it had also been healing in ways that neither had expected. Brittany's genuine recognition of the harm she had caused, combined with her commitment to spending the rest of her life working to repair that harm, had demonstrated that even the most entrenched prejudices could be addressed through accountability and genuine engagement. The goal was never to destroy the Vanderburg family, Maya explained during an interview with Oprah Winfrey. The goal was to demonstrate that actions have consequences, that methodical discrimination affects real people in real ways, and that people with power and privilege have a responsibility to use that power and privilege constructively rather than exclusively. The success of the Rodriguez-Jackson Institute's approach had inspired similar initiatives in other industries and other countries. Executives around the world were adopting proactive approaches to addressing discrimination, not just because it was morally right, but because Maya had demonstrated that it was also economically smart. Companies that implemented comprehensive equity initiatives saw improved employee satisfaction, better customer relationships, reduced legal risks, and stronger financial performance. Discrimination, it turned out, was not just morally wrong, but economically inefficient, and Maya's approach provided practical tools for addressing both the moral and economic problems simultaneously. The business case for equity is overwhelming, Maya explained during a presentation to the World Economic Forum. Discrimination wastes human talent, creates inefficiencies, and generates risks that no modern company can afford to maintain. The question isn't whether companies can afford to address bias. The question is whether they can afford not to. As Flight 447's first anniversary approached, Maya Rodriguez-Jackson had transformed an incident of personal discrimination into a global movement for structural change. The quiet dignity she had maintained while being harassed had become a model for leadership under pressure. The methodical response she had implemented had become a framework for addressing discrimination across industries and continents. But most importantly, she had demonstrated that individual moments of injustice could become catalysts for fundamental change when they were met with strategic thinking, comprehensive response, and unwavering commitment to ensuring that such moments became impossible to ignore and expensive to maintain. 1 year after Flight 447. Maya Rodriguez-Jackson stood in her corner office in Palo Alto looking out at a world that had fundamentally changed because of 20 minutes of discrimination that she had refused to accept quietly. The view from her 42nd floor window encompassed Silicon Valley, but her influence now extended far beyond the technology corridor where her journey had begun. The morning sun cast long shadows across her desk, illuminating a simple photograph that had become the most requested image in corporate America. Maya sitting calmly in seat 1. A while. Brittany Vanderberg gestured angrily in the aisle, captured at the moment when quiet dignity was about to triumph over loud entitlement. Maya had never wanted to become a symbol. She had built Nexus Global to solve logistics problems, not social problems. She had chosen to fly commercial to London to close a business deal, not to expose discrimination in the airline industry. She had responded to harassment because it was necessary, not because she sought confrontation. But sometimes history chooses its own heroes, and Maya had learned to embrace the responsibility that came with unwanted fame. The Rodriguez-Jackson Institute for Transportation Equity had become one of the most influential civil rights organizations in the world, not because Maya had planned to start a foundation, but because the platform created by her viral moment demanded action that matched its scope. Her phone buzzed with a message from James Martinez, who was now overseeing equity training for American Airlines worldwide. The message contained a photo from the Amsterdam airport, where James was conducting a seminar for international flight crews. The caption read, "Teaching the Flight 447 Protocols to Crews in 12 Countries. Dignity is a universal language." Maya smiled, remembering the professionalism James had shown during the most difficult 30 minutes of her public life. He had become one of the Institute's most effective ambassadors, using his experience managing the crisis to help other transportation workers understand how to prevent similar incidents. Another message came from Sarah Mitchell, who was representing 3 employees of a shipping company in Barcelona who had been discriminated against in hiring decisions. The message included a legal brief that cited the Rodriguez-Jackson standards as precedent for holding corporations accountable for methodical discriminatory practices. Sarah's work had helped establish legal frameworks that made Maya's economic approach to civil rights enforcement legally sustainable. Emma Fernandez knocked on Maya's door, carrying the daily briefing that had replaced Maya's traditional business reports. Instead of shipping routes and logistics optimization, Maya's morning briefing now included discrimination, incident reports, equity compliance metrics, and updates on the 237 companies that had adopted Nexus standards in the past month. The European Parliament voted unanimously to adopt modified Nexus standards for all transportation companies operating within EU boundaries, Emma reported, settling into the chair across from Maya's desk. The implementation timeline is 18 months with compliance monitoring beginning next quarter. Maya nodded, still processing the fact that a confrontation about an airplane seat had influenced legislation affecting an entire continent. Any resistance from industry groups? Some initial pushback from companies that prefer voluntary compliance over mandatory standards, Emma replied. But the financial incentives are too compelling to ignore. Companies that have implemented the standards report average revenue increases of 12% within the first year. It turned out that treating customers and employees with dignity wasn't just morally right, it was profitable. Companies that eliminated discriminatory practices saw improved employee retention, increased customer loyalty, reduced legal risks, and enhanced reputation values that translated directly into financial performance. Maya's tablet chimed with a video call from Derek Williams, who was broadcasting live from Lagos, Nigeria, where he was covering the African Union's adoption of transportation equity standards based on the Rodriguez-Jackson framework. Derek's journalism had evolved from technology reporting to global civil rights coverage, and his analysis of structural discrimination had helped millions of people understand patterns of bias that had previously been invisible. "Maya, you should see this," Derek said, turning his camera toward a conference room where transportation ministers from 47 African nations were signing agreements to implement bias detection systems across their national airlines and shipping companies. The impact has gone global in ways none of us could have imagined. Maya watched the ceremony with quiet satisfaction. Each signature represented thousands of travelers who would be less likely to experience the kind of discrimination she had endured. Each agreement meant that assumptions about who belonged where would become more expensive to maintain and easier to challenge. But the most meaningful update came in a handwritten letter from Brittany Vanderberg delivered by courier as part of their ongoing restorative justice process. The letter was written from the community center in Detroit, where Brittany was completing her court-ordered service working with families whose breadwinners had been excluded from employment opportunities by Vanderberg Shipping's discriminatory hiring practices. "Dear Maya," the letter began, "I know that no apology can undo the harm I caused both to you personally and to the thousands of people who were affected by our company's practices. But I want you to know that working with the families whose opportunities were stolen by our discrimination has taught me what actual superiority looks like. It looks like the single mother who maintained her dignity while being rejected for jobs she was qualified for. It looks like the veteran who continued believing in fairness despite being excluded from promotions he had earned. It looks like you sitting calmly in your seat while I tried to humiliate you based on assumptions that revealed my own ignorance." Maya set the letter aside, not ready to process the complex emotions it evoked. Forgiveness was a personal choice that couldn't be rushed or performed for public consumption. But accountability was a public responsibility that she had embraced fully. Her calendar showed 3 more meetings that day, each focused on expanding the Institute's work into new areas: educational equity and transportation training programs, healthcare equity and medical transportation services, housing equity and logistics systems that determined where goods and services were delivered. The principles she had applied to address discrimination in airlines and shipping companies were applicable to any industry where assumptions about who deserved what could affect people's access to opportunities and services. Captain Lisa Torres had scheduled a call to discuss the Federal Aviation Administration's new mandatory bias reporting requirements, which required airlines to track and report service quality metrics by demographic group. Airlines that showed consistent patterns of inferior treatment for passengers of color would face regulatory review and potential sanctions. Alex Rivera was preparing a presentation about expanding the Institute's investigative capabilities to cover discrimination in international shipping lanes, where workers from developing countries often faced methodical exploitation that went unmonitored and unaddressed. But the call Maya was most looking forward to came at the end of the day from a group of high school students in Atlanta who had started a club called the Flight 447 Society. The club's mission was to document and address discrimination in their own school and community, using the principles Maya had demonstrated: quiet courage, comprehensive documentation, strategic response, and commitment to structural change rather than personal revenge. Ms. Rodriguez-Jackson, the club president, said during the video call, "We wanted to thank you for showing us that one person can make a difference if they're willing to stand up for what's right and follow through with action that matches the scope of the problem." Maya smiled, remembering her 12-year-old self sitting by a hotel pool, promising herself that she would build something big enough that no one could ever again tell her she didn't belong. The high school students were making similar promises, but they were doing so with tools, frameworks, and support systems that hadn't existed when Maya was their age. "You don't need to thank me," Maya told them. "You need to continue the work. Discrimination does not disappear because one person challenges it one time. It disappears because enough people challenge it consistently, strategically, and with commitment to ensuring that the solutions are as big as the problems. As the call ended, Maya returned to her window, watching the sun set over Silicon Valley. The Rodriguez-Jackson Institute occupied an entire floor of the building now, with staff working around the clock to monitor equity compliance, investigate discrimination complaints, and develop new tools for preventing bias before it could cause harm. The work was far from finished. Discrimination had evolved over centuries and wouldn't disappear overnight. But Maya had demonstrated that individual moments of injustice could become catalysts for comprehensive change when they were met with strategic thinking, adequate resources, and unwavering commitment to ensuring that dignity became not just an aspiration, but an operational standard. Her final message of the day came from Emma forwarding a news report that Vanderburg Shipping had officially declared bankruptcy, with its assets being distributed to satisfy legal settlements with former employees who had been discriminated against in hiring and promotion decisions. The company that had once employed 12,000 people had been dissolved entirely, its operations transferred to competitors who had committed to implementing comprehensive equity standards. Maya closed her laptop and gathered her things, preparing for the commute home to an apartment that looked exactly the same as it had before Flight 447, despite everything that had changed around it. She still wore simple clothes, still carried the same weathered messenger bag, still preferred comfort to display. The difference was that now she knew with absolute certainty that no one would ever again mistake her quiet dignity for weakness or assume that her appearance determined her worth. More importantly, she had used her platform to ensure that such mistakes became much more difficult to make and much more expensive to maintain for anyone who chose to make them. As Maya Rodriguez-Jackson walked toward the elevator, her phone buzzed with a final message of the day. It was from James Martinez, sent from the American Airlines training facility, where he was preparing the next generation of flight attendants to recognize and address discrimination before it could escalate. The message contained just 7 words, but they captured everything that had changed since Flight 447. Dignity isn't negotiable. Thanks for proving it. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the assumptions we all make about people based on their appearance, if it reminded you that quiet strength can be more powerful than loud entitlement, then please hit that like button. Your support helps stories like this reach more people who need to hear them. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more incredible stories about justice, dignity, and the power of standing up for what's right. We share new stories every week about ordinary people doing extraordinary things when faced with injustice. And please share this video with someone who needs to hear Maya's message. Whether it's a friend who's faced discrimination, a family member who works in customer service, or anyone who believes that dignity should be universal, your share could make this story reach exactly the person who needs to see it today. Have you ever experienced something like what Maya went through? Have you witnessed discrimination and wished you had the courage to speak up? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience matters, and it might inspire someone else to find their voice when it matters most. Remember, change doesn't happen because one person stands up one time. It happens when enough of us decide that dignity isn't negotiable, that respect isn't earned through appearance or wealth, and that everyone deserves to belong in the spaces they have the right to occupy. Thanks for watching, and remember, you never know who you're talking to. Treat everyone with the respect they deserve, because true power doesn't need to announce itself. It simply acts with grace, dignity, and unwavering commitment to what's right. See you in the next story, where we'll continue exploring how ordinary moments can become extraordinary when met with courage, wisdom, and the determination to make things better for everyone.